ضيوفنا الكرام، رحبوا معنا بأزمة أوموراليف، مؤسس مدرسة البيانات من جمهورية قرغيزستان.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage Azamat Omuraliev, co-founder, School of Data Kyrgyzstan, Kyrgyz Republic, and his panel.
Morning. Hello, and welcome to our talk. I hope you had your coffee this morning and that you're all ready to follow a conversation by our incredible panel. The topic of our talk today is coding and the question of learning how to code, whether you should do it, how you should do it, and what is its impact on society. One of the main topics of this forum is adaptivity, and to me, technology and education lie on the opposite sides of the spectrum. Technology is incredibly adaptive, rapidly changing, and constantly evolving. It's positioned at the cutting edge of industry and science. And then, on the other hand, education is a rigid, complex, distributed infrastructure. It plays a central role in shaping what our society will look like, but it takes a long time to change. So today, I would like to let the panelists talk to the audience about the difficulty of such interplay of how to learn something like coding. Our speakers today are Nora and AlNashwan to my left, a local from Riyadh who had experience as a developer and now works for IBM and leads Code for Girls Saudi Arabia. And then to the left from her is Latta from the US. He's a Peter Thiel Fellow who at the age of 17 founded Hack Club, a network that brings coding into high school classrooms. And then finally, there's Boris Paillard, who came from France. He studied applied mathematics and is now the CEO of Wagon, a programming school that offers boot camps in more than 30 cities worldwide. But before we start our conversation, I think it's very important to answer one question, one very fundamental question, and it's about whether we should all learn to code. So, Zach, do you think that coding is the new literacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, I kind of grew up as part of the first generation that had the App Store. And this idea of making something that people use was just present in your mind all the time. And for some reason, as a kid, I could just never pull myself away from computers. I built my first website when I was 7. When I was 14, I got my first job writing software. By the time I was 16, I dropped out of high school. I was making more money than both my parents combined. And I had over 5 million people using the software that I'd worked on. So I think that when you think about programming, I really think this is the closest thing we have today to a superpower. I mean, really, learning the skill, it's a multiplier. Suddenly someone, whether you're 40 or 14, whether you're in Saudi Arabia or any other country in the world, you can have something that makes an impact on the lives of millions of people. So I think that no matter what we do in the next 10, 20, 30 years, coding is only going to increasingly become part of the fabric of society. The real question is, do you want to be one of the people that's controlling this and has the power to make change, or do you want to be stuck in the past?
Thanks. That's a great answer. So to move on from that, I would like to let the panelists talk about what coding implies, and this question is addressed to Nora. So do you think that coding is a proxy for learning some other implicit skill, maybe computational thinking or something of sorts?
Okay. Thank you first, Azamat, for the introduction. And yeah, I think coding is a way to learn broader thinking skills, the skills to be competitive in a rapidly changing workforce. But it depends heavily on the way we teach it. The more we focus on thinking rather than the syntax of a programming language, the more we will acquire such skills. Problem solving, as an example for the skills we learn from coding. It enables the coder to think about the problems he sees and how he can use coding as a tool to help him to solve the problems. And also, once he starts implementing, from another aspect, when he starts implementing his idea, he will run into many problems that he needs to find out why these problems are happening and how it can be solved. And regardless of the time we think about our solutions, before we start writing our code, we realized that the code in most cases will not work from the first time. And that teaches them to keep trying. And on the human side, I believe it teaches the coders to be humble and be open to learn from their mistakes.
So thank you, Nora, for the answer. So now I would like to ask Boris, also in the same, on the same kind of topic. Do you think that to learn the skills that Nora mentioned, problem solving, persistence, humility, is programming and coding the most efficient way to acquire those skills, or is there any alternative?
Yeah. So I think that when we do speak about coding, the first thing that people have in mind is the problem-solving part. It's like you have a big program to write to solve a complex problem, and to do that, you can't try to do it from scratch. You have to break down this problem into smaller pieces, and that's where actually you will train your problem-solving skills. But that's the one thing that we all think about when we speak about coding, but at the end of the day, there is something very important, which is kind of the developer mindset. And as Zach was telling, you don't learn to code just to code. When some friends tell me, like, Boris, I want to learn to code, and I ask, why? Most of the time, they don't know why. And code is a means to develop products that will be used by people. And so one of the skills you get when you start coding is basically the developer mindset, get the things done. Like as Mark Zuckerberg has said, move fast and break things. Unless you break things, you're not moving fast enough. And I think it summarizes well the kind of developer mindset, because when you develop something as a developer, even very experienced developer, you don't try to anticipate the perfect product or the perfect solution. You write the first program, you test it, you see how it works, and then you iterate with a trial and error process. And I think we are all here very familiar, because we do have the same way of doing with entrepreneurship. I mean, it's from the lean startup theory. We all know that. But at the end, that's how we do design. So there was a talk about design before. And now designers, they are not trying to anticipate all the design. They just quickly build a prototype, a wireframe. They detect users. They test it to see if the usability is good, and then they iterate. Same for marketing. Same for entrepreneurship. So as a coder, that's what you will get the things done. And the third thing is adaptability to new workflows and tools. Yeah. Because as a developer, it's crazy the number of tools you have to master. Imagine, I know you are not coders, but imagine you're working in a team with 10 developers, working on a project with hundreds of different files, and you're all coding into the same files. How do you do to work? Are you exchanging files by email? Of course not. It would be a nightmare. So you have to put in place new workflows, new tools, new ways of working, and that's also a big, big takeaway when more generally, not just code, but you learn to code in a team on a product, that you will get this very high adaptability to new workflows and tools that you can then apply to the new economy and in business, product operation, design, and so on. So I think it's a good entry point, one of the best.
So you're talking about coding as a sort of mindset instead of just a tool. And how do you think you can teach that? How do you teach coding as a mindset? Yeah,
that's very correlated, because it's not just coding as a mindset. Because if I teach you how to code with a boring lecture of 3 hours, the truth, you won't have this mindset at the end of the day. So it's not about just learning to code. It's just like the way you will learn it. So for instance, we do have a coding bootcamp, a 2-month program, and we teach people how to code a product. We don't want to train developers, so we do have lots of entrepreneurs who come to us to be able to build a product and test their ideas. So I guess it's about how you teach that, actually, more than learning to code.
Okay. So the next question is addressed to Zach. Since Hack Club is a non-profit, and since you also aim to propagate a sort of social good, as Boris mentioned, it's important to think about which problems you're solving, not just about the problem-solving mindset. So I was wondering, what do you think coding can solve among the problems that are bothering the societies today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things you learn when you learn to program is that you can understand the world around you through asking why until you can't ask why anymore. Because that's how you debug programs. When you have a problem in your software, you need to figure out what the root cause of it is. So when you learn to code, you learn this idea of first principles thinking, of getting to the most fundamental idea that you can and building up from there. And I also think when you learn to code, you realize that the world around us is built by people no smarter than you or I, and that if only you put in the effort, you can actually do something to change things. So I'm really excited about different models of learning, particularly models that focus on getting young people into the real world. So I'm part of a program called the Thiel Fellowship, where the entrepreneur Peter Thiel gives $100,000 to young people to not go to college. And I think one of the really interesting things about this program is that it's showing that as a young person, you can take a different route. And you can learn not just in the classroom, but through going out in the real world and trying to make something that actually matters. So I'm really excited about asking the question, how can we get young people in the real world? Doing real things, where they are thinking from first principles.
Yeah. So with all the organizations that our panelists run, I think that in certain ways you're also building communities. And I was wondering if, Nora, you can elaborate on that, on the factor of building a community, and what is its role in the education that you're offering?
Okay. First, one of the important roles for a community is to stimulate learning by setting a role model that will motivate the students to learn more. And sometimes, especially when the topic is heavy or it needs more time to study, you might lose motivation in the middle. And it's important to have community with you that will encourage or that will provide you a motivative environment and a supportive community that will go with you, and also it will enable you to get instant feedback from the instructor. Sometimes you need to get answers for your questions immediately. And also when I learned or when I attended one of the boot camps worldwide, I remembered when everyone coming from different industry, they were asking questions that will never come to my mind. So it helped me to understand the topic more from different perspectives.
Thank you. Boris, I would like to ask you on a more practical note, how do you maintain a relevant and up-to-date curriculum in such a rapidly evolving field? Maybe you can talk about your experience at Wagon.
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing is like technology is moving fast. So to be very concrete, a programming language is evolving. Like developers will ship new version of this programming language, same for the libraries or all the tools that developers are using. So the first thing you need to do, like it's the market requirement, is to make your curriculum update to the latest version of the technologies you're teaching. So that's the first thing. But that's part of what we're doing, and for doing that, the only thing is you have to basically run frequently your courses and iterate on your courses. So that's more for the technical aspect of curriculum iteration, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's very hard for like traditional higher education to keep up like to the pace of technology, because if they invest in long-term courses, well, they won't have necessarily the capacity to actually update every year like long curriculum of 1 year. So the bootcamp model, which is very short, because it's a 2 month, so 2 months, we have 30 cities, so we've iterated on the curriculum like 2,000 times from the beginning of when we launched, and we do that because we run that very, very frequently. So the first thing is having frequent feedback, and for that you need data. So when you do a traditional course at university, good teachers will ask the students to give a feedback at the end of the course, but the truth is it rarely happens, and also what is made of this feedback. I mean, the startup world use data, but in order to iterate, like just seeing as the data like that is useless. And if you're having a 1 year course or doing a course once in a year, you don't have the right incentive to actually update your curriculum. So what we do for that, so of course we do have the platform to get the data about, okay, how the students are doing with their exercise for this specific day. So the data doesn't give you the solution, it just gives you the problem.
Yeah.
So it's same for analyzing the data from a website. You will see that someone is not doing something, not buying a product or whatever. And for education, it's the same. This data allows us to know that there is still a bottleneck or a friction in the learning process, but the truth is to really find a solution. I truly believe, and that's why I have a physical coding bootcamp, that the best way is being in front of a class. That's what will give you the solution and the next iteration of your curriculum. So I'm very skeptical about, curriculum generated by AI, that will just automatically update the content. I think we could adapt the curriculum with the data and AI, but I don't think that we can update the content itself, or it will take a bit of a time, because this, I think, the greatest way to do that is being in front of a class, for me.
So do you think that university education, unless it becomes as adaptive, will become obsolete?
It's just that they have to reinvent a bit the way, like the frequency, but they're doing that already. I mean, I'm from one of the best engineering schools in France, and they totally changed their curriculum, like breaking it down to modules of 2 months. And when I was doing this school, I did have this general engineering course for the first year, specializing for the second year, and so on. But they understood at the end of the day that you'd better like do a 2 months boot camp, focusing 2 months on something than doing something else. I mean, if I would have learned these like skills this way with 2 months intensive program, maybe today I will be, you know, a plane pilot, like a professional sushi chef, and whatever, you know. But now I know a bit of everything, and so they are starting to change their curriculum, but they are big organizations. So of course, when we say disrupt the model or whatever, you can't do that if you. I mean, it's obviously you will get slower the more like the bigger you are. So it will take time, but they're going there, and that's why we are starting to partner with them, because we want to tell them, let's not be competitors, or it's a shame that your students come to us because they feel they were missing that. Let's just work together to implement these new curriculums into your own programs, basically.
Zach, so I think at Wagon, Wagon focuses more young students and young professionals, and I wanted to talk to you about the difference between teaching coding to those people and to the younger audience, those who are only entering high school or middle school. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's actually pretty similar. I think so for us, to give some more background on our program, so we're an after-school program primarily in US high schools. We're starting to go international. And right now we're in 35 states across the US. We're in 280 schools there. We're in 3,000 students that come every week. And then internationally, we've started pilot programs in 15 countries. So for us, the way we think about it, and the reason we go after high school instead of different age groups, is that at the age 14, 15, this is the first time in your life you're starting to ask the question, who am I? And what will I do? What is the purpose of my life? So for us, when we think about teaching programming, we think of it as teaching, as using a Trojan horse to instill a set of ideas that we care about. We want to encourage young people to ask really big questions about their lives at a much earlier age, and start thinking about optimizing for things like impact, starting from the age of 14 rather than from the age of 24. When we think about teaching the program itself, we're a community-based approach. I think that especially at this age, community is everything. And we think about producing real, tangible value from day one. So one thing you'll never see if you go into a hack club is one student lecturing at a bunch of other students. Instead, everything's project-based. It's like a mini hackathon that happens every single week at your school. So we think a lot about how to provide a first win to students who've never written any code before. So if you come to a hack club, by the end of the first meeting, every single student leaves with a website online. And over the course of the year, we think about building this really tight feedback loop for the students that are a part of it, because if you have a bad experience, you're not going to come back. But also, I think the same sort of stuff kind of applies to older folks, too. It's just that young people are less tolerant of bad experiences.
Nora, one question to you about the stigmas that surround coding. Do you think there are any stigmas that are preventing some groups of people from learning this, and whether you've seen any of this in your own work?
Okay. Yeah, I think there is a lot of stereotypes about programmers or computer scientists, but it might not prevent people from pursuing this path, but it might affect or it might impact their self-esteem, and it might make them hesitate about their capabilities. But I believe we are on our way to change it. Thankfully, we have a lot of examples, successful examples and role models who proved to us that there is no single gender or personality characteristic to be successful in computer science or in any other major.
Thank you. One last question to Boris. So the boot camps that you are offering, they're not free, but there are a lot of models that indeed offer free education, for instance, by NGOs or organizations that offer online models. There are some problems with those because in the offline mode, if you're offering education for free, then most of the times it takes the form of short-term trainings which don't necessarily yield the expectations. And with online models, there is a relatively low completion rate. For instance, most of the online courses like Coursera or MIT X, they have a completion rate around 5%. So do you think that in order for the education to be efficient, you have to pay for it or have any other kind of commitment? Because otherwise, what do you think about this factor?
Well, I think about the online and in real life thing. I'm a big believer that education need to have a bit of in real life education, and we can't learn everything online. I mean, you can get familiar with some first notions of coding, but it's very hard to connect the dots of what you can learn online. So we start doing lots of tutorials, but it's hard to figure out the big picture, and ultimately how to build any idea from scratch and code it. So that's for online on-site. For the paid model, I don't have strong opinions because there are different boot camps that are based on taking a proportion of the salary that the person will get when he will be hired as a developer after the boot camp. It's just in our case, we build this program not just to train junior developers so that they find positions. We had a wider approach to say okay, we'll take anyone, teach them the basics of programming and how to build a product, and then provide them a community so that they keep learning with a peer-to-peer approach. And it's kind of a very simple contract, and we end up with entrepreneurs, with people who want to freelance. I mean, half of our students come from business school backgrounds, and they don't necessarily want to be full-time developer as a job. Yeah. So our contract is very simple, and that's because we have this specific model that at the end, what makes more sense to us is to have a very concrete contract. I think education is a contract. You can't teach something to someone who doesn't want to learn. So at the end, we say, okay, you'll pay this amount for the 2 months, but you will have also a lifetime community of developers and teachers. So our teachers keep asking questions to our students for life. And I discovered this community approach. I'm not a developer myself. I mean, I'm a born-again developer, we could say. So I learned that very late. And the thing I discovered, because to me, the way I learned it at school, I had lots of cliché about the lonely developer, who is not a social person. But what I did discover when I started this coding bootcamp was that developers are among the most social. They are very community-oriented. If you look at meetups, the event platforms, the biggest groups, they come from developers. If you look at GitHub, it's where you have thousands of developers collaborating on open source projects. And so for me, an alumni network, from my experience at school, it was just about getting an internship when you end up school. But I discovered that when it's about code, it's about life learning, the community, and not just about business connection and can you intro me to whatever. And so I'm going out of your question. So the short answer is in our case, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Online, I'm convinced on the importance of on-site teaching, on the paid versus tuition fees versus different models. I think it's good that you pay because it's I don't know, going to a psychoanalyst, maybe it's kind of you're investing in yourself, but it's not, for me, a mandatory to have an impact, not necessary.
Yeah. And Zach, can I address the same question to you? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think there are 2 fundamental shifts that have happened in education that nobody's talking about, and I think they play into this. I think the first is that for a very long time, the problem that we had to solve for with schools was how do we just simply get access to information to students around the world? How can we simply get access to information needed to learn mathematics or to learn language? We need a literate population. But starting 10 years ago, every single young person, and eventually literally every single young person, started having all of human history and knowledge in their pockets with cell phones and the internet. The new problem is that they're just choosing not to use it. And suddenly, the problem that we need to solve for with schools is not one of access, but one of excitement. How do we get young people to care? And I think this is where different models are really interesting. In many countries, public school is compulsory. If you don't go, you literally are violating the law. And I think that says a lot about the incentive structures that drive our schools. And that's the second problem, I think, with schools today. where when you look at all of the different stakeholders that make up the school experience, the students, the parents, the teachers, the school administration, in the US, the parent-teacher associations, the property taxes, the homeowners associations. In the US, there's the State Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education. There's Pearson, McGraw, all the companies that make the material for schools. And you look at each one of these individual parties and you ask, who are they building for? Who is their user? Who is the one person that if they don't satisfy, they're going to go out of business? It's never the student, ever, ever. And that's why we can have schools in the US, 60% of students in California didn't pass the math competency exam last year. This is why we can have schools that fail but still exist anyways. So when it comes to different models, whether they're free, whether they're online, I think we need to be careful about how we judge the statistics with them. Yes, only 5 to 10% of people that enroll in online courses actually finish them. But tens of thousands of people are enrolling in online courses where that number might just be 10 or 20 for a traditional in-person course. I think we need to have an open mind and be excited about new models. And for Hack Club, I mean, we're a free model. It's opt-in in schools. And this is predominantly because we target students that are underrepresented or otherwise don't have opportunity. But I think we should have an open mind and ask the question, just how do we serve our youth today? Because clearly what we have right now is not working.
So I think that's a good note to conclude the conversation among us, but I would like to open up the floor. So if there are any people who want to ask a question to our panel, then we can maybe start with number 2.
Hello, my name is Karima Nabuljadail. I'm an Olympian and an architect as well. So my question is for Boris. So it's very true that coding is moving at a fast pace, but it's also a double-edged sword. When used for the wrong intentions, it can be very dangerous. So my question is, are there any ways we can hold coding in check for global ethics? Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't get what. Can you just rephrase the question? I didn't get all of it.
Are there any ways for us to hold coding in check with global ethics?
I'm not sure I understood the question. Like, is there a way to make code ethics?
It's that like technologists have a lot of power. How do we check that power?
Ah, okay.
Because like, what if someone wanted to like do something for bad, right, using tech, like kind of like what happened with Facebook in Myanmar or something?
Yeah, okay. It's a great question actually. So sorry, I'm not very familiar with like. I mean, I'm familiar with the superpower that code gives you and the fact that you can build good things and bad things with code because you can have an impact on millions of people very shortly. I do think we have a responsibility as training the future coders to speak about that. To be totally honest with you, I mean, we have total beginners starting our courses, so they're not necessarily thinking about building like, empires, or it's not something that we are like we face a lot with the kind of students we have. So I'm not an expert about, like coding ethics, or it's not really part of the scope of what we're teaching. But actually, it's a great question because we should maybe add some more courses and sensibilize people a bit more about the impact and the power they have when they learn how to code. But for now, I don't know. Maybe some of the other speakers have some like insight on that. It's something that most of the coding schools they don't really address, and that's not necessarily a good thing.
So
but,
Zach, maybe you have some thoughts?
Yeah, we're running low on time. But I have a lot of thoughts on this. We should talk. I think ethics is like going to be the #1 question that like defines technology as a field over the next few years. I think what happened in Myanmar with Facebook this year is like only the start. I think that this is going to be the dominant conversation.
But
so we should talk.
I think it's also like part of the responsibility of the government. I mean, for me also, like in France, for instance, there are this big regulation right now about protecting the data, and it's called RGPD, so it's kind of a French acronym. And so it has huge impact now on the way you can get users' data on the website and use this data. And that's something that all French tech entrepreneurs are very aware of because you can get very big fines. And so I guess that this work also is the responsibility of a country to put the regulation in place so that a tech company does not sell your data, does not like do whatever they want with that?
It needs to be more than that, but yeah, I think regulations are a good start too. But yeah, we should talk. I want to leave time for another question.
Yeah. So yeah, we can ask one final question, maybe in number 3.
Hi, hello. My name is Jane Lu. I'm from China, and I have already studied AI for 3 years in Peking. And I think what you do is a really nice thing. But my question is, do you think it's a good business? And do you want to make it better, that it can bring you profit, or how? Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Is the question addressed to Zach or just in general?
To all the chairs.
Could you repeat the question? I couldn't hear that.
I think it's about the business model, right? If you
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
make
Do you think
a
it's-
profit out of
Yeah.
education.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can
Do you think it's a
participate
good
in-
business?
Yeah.
I can answer
Oh, yeah.
part of this question. I think making it as a profit or changing the business model help the people or motivate the people to commit. I have seen it. I have worked with developers for more than a year. And once it's free, many people do not commit. And on the other side, we don't only want to teach girls how to code, but also to create career opportunities for females who are graduating from computer science or related majors.
Thank you. So I think we're running out of time, so I will have to close this conversation. But please give a round of applause to our amazing panelists. Thank you. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. I think we should go that way. Oh, okay.